In our last video, we explored how the hordes of bone splitters organize themselves for war, and how this sea of green madmen, or mad orcs I guess you could say, can combine to create a single alpha predator, completed with hordes of infantry, range support, a flanking force, and a core team of powerful elite units. But the ability to forge into this single-minded killing machine from a horde lies solely in the leadership of the Bone Splitters' army. Their wills are powerful enough to bind this madness of the WAAAGH and channel it and guide it into devastating magics and guide the War Clan. And in this video, we're going to be meeting those leaders of any given Bone Splitter army, who they are, how they contribute to this manic energy of the Horde, and unify it into a singular weapon. The most important place to start here is the WAAAGH Prophet. These are the undisputed leaders of any given Bone Splitters war clan. They act as powerful nodes of WAAAGH energy and are the defining characters of the army. They exude this intoxicating energy around them, getting orcs stoked for battle anywhere near them. And what's interesting is this aura itself isn't bound by just a couple feet. It can exude for quite a distance. In fact, when an orc boy hears the calling of Gorkamorka and becomes a bone splitter, as we discussed in the first video this week, he's drawn to this energy. And what's interesting is that other orc clans, right, the Iron Jaws of the realms, or the Greenskins, the little tiny tribes that just kind of roam around, all of them, even if they're not bone splitters, respect the WAAAGH prophets, because there's just something about them exuding this energy, this aura, this magnetism, that sometimes they see the grinning face of Gork or Mork above him, but whatever it is, there's no denying that wherever he goes, a good fight is about to happen. And if you know one thing about orcs, is that they're always looking for a good fight. Now, the key to a successful prophet is to keep the horde moving, keep them fighting, keep them hunting, keep them winning. And to aid them in that, they can actually sense powerful beasts for hundreds of miles, even without tracks. And that's kind of like their Gorkamorka given gift. They draw those desperate orcs to them and then point them in a direction of a large creature. In fact, the WAAAGH prophets themselves even say that the spirit of Gorkamorka calls to them, and as proof of their rank, they are adorned with the greatest bone bits of the beasts that his war clan has killed, reclaimed from hundreds of great hunts. That being said, even though they are the undisputed leader, 100%, they don't act like a normal orc warlord. These are spiritual leaders for the Bone Splitters, proclaiming the will and mission of Gorkamorka, filling the realms with his destructive wiles, and acting as the heart of the living storm on the battlefield, as we mentioned earlier. In addition to that, he is a powerful wizard, right? Arcane energy just glows off of him, and so when he's in battle, these abilities come to the fore. Not even he knows what form these magics will take, but usually it's something that has to do with pounding the enemy. So it can be a foot, a fist, a tooth, something like that. To those on the ground receiving this punishment, it's as if Gorkamorka himself had entered the fray, right? The magnitude of the chaos in front of them and the power of a god raining down. It's not hard to see why, if you want to create a narrative for your own war clan, defining the characteristics and the goals and the name of your WAAAGH prophet really does have a trickle-down effect. As with most horde armies, if you really add character and vibrance to your heroes, it trickles down to all the units, and it's no different with this, but in more so because this is a central focal point leader of this entire army. Now, just below the WAAAGH prophet are the war docs. They kind of act as a second tier of leadership, but leadership's kind of a soft term here. And these are the heroes that make up the Cop Ruck, the core, along with their Moor boys, to act as the elite hammer. And if you want to think of them in another way, think of them as like acolytes, and in this way, like the prophet is the religious leader, right? They're kind of part of that system, but they're not like in full control of anything. In fact, they kind of exist as a role to exert the will of the WAAAGH prophet across these huge armies. They keep the boys in check and try to amplify the WAAAGH power. I guess you could almost say they're almost like satellites for that energy. They do this by dancing, chanting, casting spells onto the boys, and all of those acts amplify and channel the manic energies around them. Now, a typical Bone Splitters war clan will have a single WAAAGH prophet, but many war docs. In general, this is who would replace a WAAAGH prophet should he die in battle or just by ingesting too much WAAAGH energy and his head explodes. Now I said generally, but it's not always the case. Gorka Morka always chooses his WAAAGH prophets. But it could be something like the prophet dies in battle and his spirit jumps out of his body and into a nearby war dock, or a war dock is just struck by sickly green lightning. But these are generally the next in charge. And these smaller heroes act as a critical support to the army, spreading the WAAAGH power and the will of the WAAAGH prophet, dances to heal, empower, and strengthen arcane might. Next up is the Savage Big Boss. This is the classic orc that we know and love. Even though the WAAAGH prophet is the undisputed spiritual and military leader, there are tons of boys in any given war clan, so delegating authority and responsibility is important. The Savage Big Bosses are in charge of keeping the near-endless green flood of boys in check, pointed at the enemy and ready for a fight. And the reason I say that these are the orcs we know and love is because their rank, I guess you could say, is based on might makes right. They are the biggest and meanest of the orc boys. But no matter how big and strong you are, you actually still need to be chosen by the WAAAGH prophet to become a Savage Big Boy. Now, in particularly larger war clans, there can be several Savage Big Boys, and they generally make up the leaders of the Gob Rucks. We talked about those, the brutal and cunning Rucks that work together to destroy an enemy with a 1-2 punch. And it makes sense that they would be in those formations because that's where all the boys are, the boys they're trying to lead and corral. And while each Gob Ruck specifically might have multiple Savage Big Bosses, one of those big bosses will be chosen to be the Gorka boss and the Morka boss. Right? Someone is solely in charge of the brutal Ruck, and one is solely in charge of the cunning Ruck. And we mentioned yesterday that dividing the Gob Rucks works as a war strategy, but also keeps them in constant competition to do better. And that competition is important, because it keeps the Savage Big Bosses from thinking too hard about why they're taking so many orders from a smaller, weaker wizard. But it's its own little ecosystem that totally works. Everyone has a job, a role, something that they contribute to, and they get to just enjoy how they express their love for Gorka Morka, whether that's through antics like going with the Mork side, where it's a lot of like wizardry and shooting with arrows, or the Gork side that's just upfront, simple brutality. And the last hero in this army is the Maniac Weird Knob. Now this is basically when a war dock levels up. Not quite to the point of being a WAAAGH prophet, but he gets a cool item. We'll talk about that in a second. So if one of these low-level wizards manages to kill a particularly strong beast, they can fashion a powerful bone stave from their remains. It's that big thing he's carrying on the boar back. Now, while all of the bits from bones of that can empower bone splitters, the arcane craftsmanship allows a Maniac Weird Knob to do more than that. It's more than just sticking a bone inside your skin and kind of getting a little power boost. This is on another level. In the height of battle, he can unleash the beast power held within that stave, bolstering the might of all bone splitters nearby. To onlookers, they see the beast that's trapped within manifest itself on the battlefield with a sickly green hue. So imagine if you saw a wall of boar boys charging at you, and all of a sudden he releases the spirit, and instead of this already scary wall of green coming at you, it just, this spirit bear or something large and terrifying just kind of hologram it all around them, right? They kind of just give off this presence of this huge creature that's coming and rampaging towards you. The power of that great monster descends upon the enemy, but instead of reaching out with its claws or teeth, it's the full speed rush of a wall of boar riders imbued with bestial energy. This leader is the backbone of the Snaga Ruck, right? That's the one who's the horns of the beast, able to operate largely independent as a scouting and flanking force. That stave acts as a rare and invaluable moat of this kind of WAAAGH energy that we're talking about. And that's what allows the Snaga Ruck to function so autonomously. They don't need to be near the WAAAGH prophet. They have their own power that they take with them. Now what's more is that the Weird Knob here is the only one who can put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak. He's the only one who can reel in that feral beast spirit and reseal it in the stave. Otherwise, the boar riders around him would just be trapped in that perpetual rage, battle fervor at the top of WAAAGH madness. In a sense, they would be truly lost, because they wouldn't have the sense to even form a ruck anymore, or let the words of the WAAAGH prophet direct them. And that's it for the heroes. Not a ton of options here. This isn't a large faction, but let's talk about why these units are cool. One of the defining things we talked about a few times tonight that I really love about this faction is that to the Bone Splitters, these pieces of bone and spirits of animals, they're very, very magical and powerful, but to anyone else, they're nothing. They're just bones. So like that Maniac Weird Knob, right? He has his specially crafted stave that has the beast spirit in there. It just, unleashes the animal energy to anyone nearby. Well, if a Free People's person was to pick that up, right? Say you beat the Bone Splitters, you pick up that thing, it's just a big bone. There's nothing to it. But there's something about this faction that communes with wild spirits in such a way that they kind of bring them to life. And I think that's really cool. It's also something we see in the Fireslayer book. There's a lot of connections here to Fireslayers, but the idea being like, to anyone else, it's just gold. But to the Fireslayers, they can see if it's Urgold. I love the idea that we're all fighting these enemies, we don't understand how they work, right? None of this should work, but it just kind of does. And you can't talk about the leaders of this army without talking about how it kind of subverts what we know about orcs so far. So in the old world, it was always just very much this might makes right type thing, where the orcs were the strong, brutal ones, and the grots, as we know them now, were kind of the cunning, conniving, backstabby ones. But this totally gets flopped on its head when the leader of your orc army that's all about melee and getting up in there and fighting with your fist, well, that guy's a wizard. Not only is he just a wizard, he's a guy who's not particularly great at fighting. That would be your savage big boss. So I absolutely love that fact where it's just kind of a more diverse take, almost more tribalistic. There's a lot of tribes in our own world where, sure, they have a war leader, but there's also the tribe like mystic, and that's the person like the elder. We revere their opinion. We go to them with questions that they lead us, even though somebody else is responsible for warfare. And I like how it kind of calls out to a lot of those cultures without kind of directly copying any single one of them. It also gives a much more of like a religious fervor tone to this faction, which I think really is what separates them, really makes them unique, is that they have this mission being led by a hero you wouldn't expect to be led by for a bunch of orcs. And he corrals them in a way to achieve it, and he's being blessed by their god for doing so. All the abilities that a WAAAGH prophet has for hunting beasts and finding them and bringing Bone Splitters to himself, those are all like signs of Gorgomorka's approval. And while other orcs, like Ironjaws for example, would look at this and be like, why are you letting him lead you? He's not that strong. None can deny that there's something about this character, the WAAAGH prophet, we all have to listen to, we all respect on some level. And on that note, I wanted to bring up again is that when you have a Horde army, your heroes matter more, because everyone else is just a sea of faces, but your heroes are the ones who define what that army is about. So create the lore for your WAAAGH prophet, maybe like a Wardock or something like that with him, and go nuts. It's a great way to flesh out the story for your army and really get the most out of it. And the last thing I have here is I love the way that the lore translates to the tabletop. And I don't usually talk about tabletop stuff too much because it changes, books come out, war scrolls get rewritten, points change, all that stuff. But one thing I will say is that right now, when we look at the lore, right, all of the heroes of this army are singularly focused on either A, discerning the will of Gorgomorka, right? That would be like your war docs are a huge part of that, but so is obviously the WAAAGH prophet, or corralling the boys to go fight better, and that would be like your weird knob or your savage big boss, right? So, but in the rules, that's exactly what they do. They're either channeling and projecting WAAAGH energy, or they're doing something to make the Horde as a whole, the Sea of Green, more effective. And I think that was just translated so well. Yes, there are heroes that are better in combat than others. Yes, they are wizards, they have the wizard rules and that kind of stuff. But more than that, they're all about the Horde. Which fundamentally, if you read the lore for this thing, it just references the sheer number and terror involved in that number of Bone Splitters. And I absolutely love, whether their rules are good or not, I love when the translation from story to rules happens very well. And so friends, those are my thoughts on the Bone Splitters hero. I'd love to hear which one you think is the best. For me, hands down, WAAAGH prophet. I love the dude, I love the mask, I love all of it. I think there's a really good case for the Savage Big Boss as well. So thank you all so much for watching. Look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's video. Happy wargaming.